When I was 20, I fell for a boy.
This is a story about a ghost people who live in a ghost territory.
As a daughter of South Korean immigrants, I grew up being told stories about our homeland.
It's hard from the campaign that I am on death row for crimes I did not commit.
If you step out that door, Tala, then you are choosing yourself over your family.
되게 아들이 했답니까?
근데 왜 자꾸 우리 애한테 물으시는 건데요, 그러면?
Hi, welcome to RAX Puncta Artist Talk 2, part of the 26th edition of the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. My name is Jasmine Gui, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Special Projects Programmer here at Real Asian. I have short bleached hair and I'm in a Real Asian 26 sweater today. I'm sitting in front of a blue hand-dyed tapestry piece. And I'm really excited to be programming and moderating this panel today. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin this conversation. This conversation will be recorded and available online later. Additionally, we are taking audience questions for artists in the YouTube chat, so please leave your comments there and please indicate which artists you are directing your question to. RAX Puncta is a multidisciplinary exhibition currently hosted at the Bashir Yurex presentation space in the Commons at 401 Richmond. It will be open to the public until 6 p.m. on November 20th, so that's this Sunday. So please check it out. The exhibition and the programming was made possible by the Ontario Arts Council and the Canada Race Relations Foundation. RAX Puncta is also an exhibition that is thinking tenderly through the socio-political contexts that shape and form us. And so in that spirit, I want to name the context that RAX Puncta is currently embedded in. Real Asian's physical offices are located on the treaty territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat nations. As a digital program, we're meeting in an online space that feels separate from the physical, but the digital is part of a long history of development and technology that is materially complicit in land theft, displacement, surveillance, and continued violence. As a festival, we program for a wide Asian diasporic audience, and I also want to name the large forces of global imperialism that have displaced, moved, and altered many of our communities. I encourage everyone here to learn more about the histories of the lands that we may have come from over many generations, and also the histories and presence of the lands that we now presently live and work on. Besides being the Special Projects Programmer at Real Asian, I also have the privilege of being the moderator for today's discussion, and the co-curator for RAX Puncta, alongside Keiko Hart, who moderated Tuesday's artist talks featuring three of our artists, Mo Fung, Vince Ha, and Jess Hanzalkova. In today's panel, I'm joined by three artists, Noor Khan, Branavi Jayasundaram, and Yasmin Nemat Allah. So let's welcome Noor. Noor, could you introduce yourself briefly, visually describe yourself, and tell us the name of your work in the show?
Hi, everyone. My name is Noor Khan. I am sitting in front of a white wall with a black crew neck. I have curly hair, black curly hair. And I am a multidisciplinary artist, working mostly in community rather than in the studio, though I've started to work in the studio recently. And the work that I'll be talking about today is called Prescriptions, which is a video installation.
Amazing, thank you, Noor. And then Branavi?
Hi, I'm Brenna V. I am, my hair is in a ponytail. I have a black sweater on and I'm in a yellow room. I am a writer and I guess now an artist. Um, and I'm the co-executive director of the Toronto Ward Museum. We're a museum of migration that shares histories of migration and displacement, particularly within neighborhood spaces. And I'm also the managing editor of Adi magazine. And I have a lot of experience and training in Bharatanatyam dance as well. And the work I'm going to be speaking about is a video installation called Touch and Flesh.
Amazing, thank you. And then last but not least, Yasmin.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Gui. My visual description is I'm a fair-skinned woman with a white hijab and a peach-colored blazer, and I have a very sparse background, I'm noticing now. So it's fairly white with nothing really and a piece of maybe a mirror over there. I'm an artist and an art worker, usually based in Toronto, Ontario, but currently actually in Detroit, doing my master's in sculpture, because a lot of my practice is an installation and sculpture-based practice, and a lot of my work is thinking about trauma and grief and the spaces that occupy these emotions, and the spaces that we occupy as people who carry those emotions. And I'm coming, I think, in a different way that I usually come in Artist Talks today. And I'm kind of excited about it because I'm coming very much as a supporter, a collaborator with Brenna V for Touch and Flesh, while Brenna V's very much baby and love was this project. I was like supporting from the sidelines and cheering them on. So I'm really excited to participate in this capacity.
Oh, it's so good. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I think, yeah, I just think like there's so much to be said for like the collaborative energies that happened in, I think, all of the pieces. So I think we can start with maybe the impetus that propelled you to make these video works. Tuesday's works, they were physical installations. And then today the focus is really on the video and film work, still in an installation format. But yeah, Noor, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I guess I started thinking about the concept of prescriptions, which started off as a film installation or a film in 2018. And that was when well, I'm just to a background. I'm based in Scarborough, have been for most of my life. And then around 2017, 2018, I was in Parkdale a lot as a outpatient at CAMH, and which is the mental health institute based out of there. And I started to notice similarities between the demographics as well as storefronts and operations, as well as like city planning with both ends of the city, particularly because I'm from South Scarborough. So that's Eglinton East. And so in my mind, I kind of played these two areas a lot by each other. So in my mind, I was always thinking about these areas connected to each other, right next to each other, because I was either in one place or the other. And I mean, that was the inspiration of having of recording basically storefronts and places in both places, and then having them be placed next to each other in an installation, and then recording sounds from both communities as well. Initially, just people that I had known in Scarborough, and then collaborating with people that I started to know from Parkdale to record stories and ambient noises and sounds that I'd hear basically being on the streets, essentially. So that was, I guess the impetus was knowing that the city was starting to change at that point. They had announced the Eglinton extension, and I, was aware that there was gentrification happening in Parkdale as well, and that the new line in Scarborough would bring the same. So I wanted to document these places in that moment. And since almost all of the storefronts that I captured are not there or have changed ownership, and since also more developments have been announced in the area, like very close to me, the Shoppers Drug Mart and TD Bank that I grew up going to, that my grandmother grew up going to as well, are being shut down as of the end of this month. So my neighborhood is completely changing. I live in Bendale and Scarborough, if anyone knows. And yeah, so that was, I mean, like every single day, it kind of validates the documentation of these places because everything is just constantly changing. The project was first funded as an installation for Nuit Blanche in 2019. And it was installed as a dual screen installation in Scarborough, but in Parkdale as well. We got to install in both communities for both communities instead of having it just in one. And then with the help of the So You Think You Can Pitch prize that I was grateful to get at the 2019 Real Asian Film Festival, I got to like breathe new life into the work and create another installation which physically looks different. And the earlier works it was called Postscript. But this work is called Prescriptions. So the first one, Postscript, was named after both Parkdale and Scarborough. And Postscript meaning, afterthoughts, after a letter of signed. And both Scarborough and Parkdale are afterthoughts in policymaking in Toronto. And then thinking about like this new life to the work, like almost 3 years later, I titled this work Prescriptions because I was thinking about how we, without really knowing the cause, we'll just write a prescription. Without really knowing, the depth of an issue, we'll just write a prescription and hand it, to our cities, to our people, to patients. And policymaking is essentially, a prescription. And the film that I had made earlier was a prescription as well, because I only knew so much about the changes that were going to occur in my own community. And I had a understanding of like, what this film would become, but I really the pandemic happened and I had no idea after what would become of this work. So even in the case of this film, I feel like it was in the sense I was writing not a treatment, I was writing a prescription. We're talking nerdy film terminology here. So yeah, that's the impetus.
No, that's really interesting. And I think I'll try to revisit some of the stuff you just said later. I'm taking some notes. Barnaby and Jasmine, do you want to talk a little bit about Touch and Flesh? Barnaby can start.
Sure. So Touch and Flesh was born out of the Tamil Archive projects. One of the segments of it, the Healing Arts Dinner Circle, which I was really lucky to be a part of as a core team member, and Jasmine was one of our community fellows. And we developed an initiative kind of born out of the intention to host conversations in a dinner-like setting with wonderful food and also arts-based participatory initiatives that dealt more particularly with emotions related to care and joy and love and tenderness, but also experiences of poverty and hunger and pain in such a way that really centered joy, especially with communities that have like histories of trauma as it relates to their own migration. But then, of course, the pandemic happened and our intention for the project completely reverted itself. And then with that, this Zoom workshop was delivered at the peak of the pandemic, so April 2020. And yeah, it's just so interesting to me because originally the workshop, it was like shared to the public as movement and memory. And it was, it was like a very physical, dynamic workshop that involved people like, moving their bodies in certain ways. And we were in conversation with the Tamil Housing Co-op because it was like really interesting to me to host a movement workshop in that space. And they were really excited about it. And suddenly it felt like the world had frozen. And I wasn't really keen around the idea of doing a Zoom-based workshop. I actually hated that. But obviously I felt a lot of affirmation and encouragement from people within the collective to do that. And this is the video work that resulted through collaboration with Jasmine.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing you talk about this right now, about you kind of like not wanting to do this very physical body-based, touching like moment, a gesture, a facilitation, because of how much it translated into a sort of melancholy and loneliness once the actual program, like once the facilitation did occur. And when we started, because we had all of this footage, right? Like we had all of this footage of this recorded tender, like what was it? Like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours of footage of people Brenda very much like guiding people to ask themselves where they find joy in their bodies. And then people like, hugging their cheeks. And there were these precious moments of like visual joy that Brenda was like, we got to do something with this. And I was like, we got to do something with this. And then it became a conversation of like, how do you turn facilitation into art and fine art language? How do you translate it from it being this community gathering moment into very much this nuanced gesture of collective care that is both confusing, but also tender, but also vague, but also specific. And I really think that this work exists in a lot of these contradictions. This like very specific but important question of like almost highlighting us in a moment of time during a pandemic that redefined so much of our lives and continues to redefine our lives, of like, how do we take the moments that we were so lonely and so apart and translate them in a world where we are seeing each other, but not really, and we're still existing in that space. It felt important to mark this moment for what it is, but also for what it could be in terms of us taking care of one another in the ways that we have.
Wow, there's so much. There's so much to like think through, and I feel that there's such a strong echo between these two video works. Their shape and form coming out of the pandemic, their explorations being unintentionally related to the effects of the pandemic on communities, on bodies and individuals. And I just think there's like the works being in the space, they're really grounding energies in the space. I really feel that every time I walk into the gallery, they ask for a kind of stillness, they ask for attention, and like prolonged attention, right? Because like touch and flush is like something like 12 minutes long, right? And then with Noor's work, the audio is in the specific place, and there's so many screens to look at simultaneously that it's sort of like you have to spend some time there paying attention to each one to really get things. But I think that the art piece's ability to draw folks in is actually coming from that tenderness and that joy and exploration, or it's like heavy material, but there is like a joyful approach, there's like a celebratory or tender approach in a lot of the work. So I was wondering if maybe both works, like in both works, like how did that manifest, like that tenderness towards the themes that you're exploring, but also how that tenderness is maybe being made available to our audience, if that makes sense. And maybe we'll start with Jasmine. Actually, we'll go backwards.
I feel like for this project, it actually makes more sense for Brandon to start, and then I'll comment on the video aspect of it. Because I feel like the workshop came first and then the video came.
Oh, true. That's a good point. All right,
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So interesting. One of the questions within the workshop was, I think the first question actually was, where in your body do you locate tenderness? And then I think that served as a really good, almost like gateway to allow people to share more candidly and become vulnerable in certain ways. And I had said that I locate tenderness in my knuckles. And actually, during the exhibition launch, like the Puncta exhibition launch, someone had asked me the same question. And so it feels kind of full circle showing that now. But I said I located it in my knuckles because my grandma does this thing, which is like common in Tamil cultures and maybe other cultures, where you do this gesture to ward off evil eye and kind of like crunch your knuckles against your skull. And so the tenderness in that specific element, I think, was a thread that allowed other people to share around tenderness as well. And there's really beautiful moments kind of documented through the work. I think Vidura says something like she holds like tenderness in her cheeks, and she does this expression because that's how she like celebrates herself and her friends. So tenderness is very interesting, specifically within that time, because we were all within our little boxes / Zoom screens. But it was interesting to, like, while things were closing down and while it felt like things were becoming increasingly isolated and restricted, we were all kind of like creating a movement sequence together. So I'm forgetting the original question, but that's kind of, tenderness was the original spark to the emotions that are explored through the video.
Yeah, and I think like that tenderness that occurred in the workshop itself, it became like this question of how do you curate a sort of, because a lot of the clips of stories that are kind of in the background of the video, become this like chasing of the meaning of tenderness to the people who are kind of locating those stories in their minds during the workshop. And it makes me, and I'm thinking about both as a participant of the workshop and as someone who, went through that footage and was trying to kind of put that together when Brenevi and I were making it like come to that sort of, from the 2-hour span to the 12-minute span of like, which stories brought the tenderness out in us as people listening to the video. And it was like that sort of moment of like my own tenderness towards the stories were the most tender stories. And it was like, well, if it's tender to me, it's going to be tender to someone else. And like, I think about tenderness, and I think about like the way we think about tenderness now, it's like it's this like gentle, beautiful thing, but tenderness is also like a tender spot in your body that hurts because you bumped it, you know what I mean? Or like a tender spot in your body because it has been harmed, and therefore you require softness because of the hurt. And that meaning of tenderness, outside of it being just general softness, I think comes acute, like you become acutely aware of it in the work, because it's like you can tell that there is so much hurt underlying so much of the love that is occurring. Like, in order for, and I'm thinking about Brandon V, like your story, in order for the knocking to happen, there must be a belief of evil. You must believe that evil exists for you to want to strip it away. Like, someone must be hurting for tenderness to occur, and that duality of like, you know, exists in that body, and it's echoed in the work, because like the work hurts to listen to, but it's also it's sore in a way you want to press on a bruise. But yeah, that's a little bit of what I was thinking when we were making that together.
That's so precise, and I think like how that work is like creating that space in the exhibition. And I actually think that that second thread of that tenderness is quite connected to like Noor's approach to your footage too. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I actually think Jasmine really said like what was happening in the piece for me. Because the piece, if you really listen, it's not it's chaotic, it's pure chaos. You know, the streets of Parkdale and Scarborough, especially at that time, I feel like things have changed, you know, in the duration of the pandemic. Like streets can be quieter now, but at that time it was chaos when I was recording. And you know, the stories people were telling weren't easy to listen to, and also you know, everyone was like so active, like everyone that I was recording was so active. So like I was in a store recording and they were just like cooking the whole time, and I was on the street, and you know, people were just like active going to the grocery store, etc. So there was so much happening because people have to live their lives. And for me, I guess like I need to process that. I need to process what's happening. And your mind, I like read this the other day. It's, you know, like super obvious that your mind is a recorder. But you rarely like play back things slowly, and rarely get to like play it back in a way that you control. And the beauty of like art making is that you can control the pace of real life. Um and like meditate on like what's happening. And essentially for me, postscript and prescriptions was me like slowing things down, understanding, keeping a camera still in one place instead of moving. Because you know, if the camera had movement, it would be, I would be hit with a whole other direction of information that at that point I wasn't ready to process yet. What's happening on the other side of the camera, or like the other, you know, like diagonal to it, is too much to process at this point. And it was, you know, it's like it's a decision to point the camera at in one direction, keep it still in one direction. And in that way, in like the ways in which the camera was operated, and even the recorder was the audio recorder was operated, I was able to then look at everything, process everything, and start editing. And I guess out of the chaos came this like tender piece. Uh, mostly because there were moments of real tenderness also in like life, in me talking to someone. There were moments of tenderness because everyone showed me kindness, and everyone had jokes to tell too. So I like, even though it was chaos, it was also like a tender chaos. Um, so I you know, like I think like it's difficult because I actually start making art in the process of being, and when I'm angry at something, and as a way to cope with anger, which I had a lot of in my teenage years. And I just didn't know where to put it or place it. So for me, art making is meditative. I get to like spend time with the things that upset me. The root of anger is disappointment and hurt. And so, like, where is that coming from? So yeah, I think also scoring the piece with the track Baltimore by Nina Simone. And it was a cover by Adria Kane, who is a Toronto-based recording artist. Connecting, what's happening in Toronto to the story of what Baltimore was like in the 70s, in a particular genre of music that is connected to tenderness as well. I was trying to process everything that I had heard and seen through a single track, through a single song, essentially, that I think like made or built the soundtrack of the work. And I mean, that's just the beauty of music, is that like you can say so much in 2 minutes, and like it's also it's also, depending on what genre it is, it's tender. It brings a tenderness to it. Melody brings tenderness, rhythm brings healing and tenderness. And so just for my own gut to feel good, I had to bring in like rhythm and music, because it's not easy to like see what's happening.
That's so interesting. I feel like this is related to our next question. And it's that, you mentioned audio. Both pieces, desync your images from your audio and then choose a new pathway to reconnect them. And I think this, is related to, I think Jasmine said earlier about this process of like art making, of reconstructing something together. Can you all speak to why maybe you chose to not have the audio and the visuals be one-to-one, and how that might be related to this transition from documentation and real life to like a space that's maybe more artful or creative? Actually, Yasmin, this is probably a great place for you to start now, right?
Maybe, yes. Like the workshop came first, Jasmine. Yeah, perhaps. So I work like, I am a sculptor and installation by trade. Trade, what a funny word. But very often I find myself making video work, and as a rule of thumb, it makes sound not align with video. There are many reasons for this. I think all of them sum up to that so much of our experiences with sound and visuals are not aligned in very particular ways, and we don't notice them until we see them. Like we see things and then we hear things, and it's just like, and I always think about that idea of the fact that like I look at a plane and I think I hear the sound of a plane, but I'm not sure. And it's the knowledge of a something that implies the sound of it. And I'm interested in that like trickery of the senses almost, but also that how do you ask your audience to spend time more with your work? It's by complicating their relationship with images and the visuals and not aligning them. I think sometimes about, when you have someone look at a thing and then listen to a thing, and if it aligns, they'll stop paying attention to the one. Right? You'll see an image, you'll see a video, and like you're listening, and the listening can go at the back of your mind, or the images will go at the back of your mind. And what the people were saying were so important, but what they were doing was so important. and they were both important. And I was like, I'm gonna make them both essential. And it makes this like invitation to come back, like not to, that this work will not be fully consumed in the first time or the second time or the third time or the fourth time. You might come at the fifth time and you're still gaining more knowledge from it. And that, that back and forth of like, we're people of color here. And I think the assumption that we can be consumed at once and the very first time is a weird one. And I always, Black and brown spaces, I want to complicate that relationship for my audience, regardless of where they are at, because I'm like, this attempt at capitalistic speedy consumption is ridiculous. How do we break it down to its very, very bare components and go from the ground up? How do I make you wait? How do I make you slow down? And I'm thinking of a lot of Bernabe's like questions in the work too, the ones that were tailored. They were so focused on moments of silence. There's so much silence in that piece, and you don't really see it from the sound, you see it from the visuals. Every time people were holding themselves using like Bernabe's instructions, they were silent. And then the stories came, but the silence came first. And I think that tension and the space that Bernabe had created is so essential to how the work is received later, which is like not to its truest form, but to some true form of it.
Yeah, that made me emotional. Yeah, I think that idea of not of demanding slowness in relation to our conversation around tenderness as something that's sore, as something that asks for attention as much as it gives attention, like it's interesting to think about that as like how the space then becomes a place where we can both take and give, process and heal at the same time. I think there's so many possibilities that open up from there. Barnaby, do you have anything to say about the audio video not being synced up?
No, just that it was so gratifying for me to be able to listen to Jasmine, kind of her creative process through thinking through that. In preparation for this talk, I looked up like our original kind of email conversations around like creating the work, and I was so hands off. I was kind of like, hey, like this footage exists, something's here. Do you want to do anything with it? And Yasmin immediately was like, yeah, I would love to, and linked your own work, Obsolete Words, which is a video-based work that Yasmin had done that also doesn't synchronize the audio with the visual. And I'm so happy and grateful that you felt compelled to work with me on this.
So mutual.
Nora, what about you? Like you mentioned already using Baltimore, like connecting these like histories and these different places that have in a way like share a shared spirit because of the kinds of challenges and the kinds of communities that are in space. But for you, what were some of the decision, like the thought processes that maybe propelled that decision to strip out the interview clips? Because I know in the original video you could hear it a lot more clearly, and then when the final install went up, there wasn't that access anymore in the same way. Yeah, so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I personally use sound and an image, like I personally unsync it because it allows me to use more content and broaden like the scope of the work and bring out outside sources. So I started off in life like reading a lot, I read a lot. I was an immigrant, and the only place that my mom knew to take me was libraries. And so I read a lot. I then started writing a lot. I did my undergrad in community development and social geography at University of Toronto Scarborough. And I wrote a lot, and I was able to source so many things. But when it came to like a short film, I wasn't able to do as much, especially if it's not like archival, if it's not like if it's an original, if I'm shooting myself, I wasn't able to do the same. So the way that I was able to, like bring in multiple sources, um, that inform basically like the viewpoint and also extend the narrative was through unsyncing, and bringing in other sources, and songs and songwriting. They are other sources, and they're valid sources of knowledge. So that's like what I chose to do like very early on. I have never synced audio before. First of all, because it's really hard. Like it's really hard to sync audio. Shout out to all filmmakers that sync their audio. It's not easy, but I like personally, like I also have ADD and get really tired of like seeing someone and hearing them talk at the same time for like a stretch of, yeah, I know it sucks. It sucks. It's just like, like, and so to also kind of understand like accessibility in different ways for myself, how do I pay attention? Like experimenting with video is awesome, and that, you could break something down the way that your brain operates so you can understand it. And again, it's all about, I think for me, like trying to understand something better. The work itself was that for me. And in terms of like, it's also a great social experiment because are people really listening? I've shown this work before. People really weren't listening. Like I could tell, like people are really just looking at the visuals. 70% of people are just looking at the visuals. And the reason why, I was like, what, let's just take out the interviews for this piece, is because people do want to be spoon-fed. Audiences do want to be spoon-fed. And so I was like, what, let me just give you all what you want, because we are really being stimulated in so many ways in society. I myself am like super overstimulated, my brain. And so, like Yasmin was saying, that like being able to control something, to slow things down is, it's powerful. It's helping people reformat their brains. For me, I was like, okay, let me just give people what they want and see what happens. Like, let me play into it. So, and I don't think I did it like not on my own terms, because I think Baltimore, the track really, really like, it was enough. Like I think it was enough. Sometimes a little is enough. Sometimes giving people a minute of a reel, is enough. Like when people want to get it, they'll get it, whether it's 10 minutes or 1 minute. I firmly believe that. Like I believe it so much. So I think like it was a perfect opportunity for me to pull out the interviews, and audio, I feel like you can control so much more than visuals, and it can be a great social experiment. And I think that like artists are scientists, we're like trying to see what works, for good intentions, hopefully. But I think that like that's also like our joy is trying to find solutions for things, and trying to find solutions for ourselves as just like humans that need healing from our own art too. So yeah, I think like those were the reasons why the audio was unsynced, and will probably continue to be in the future.
No, that's really a really great answer. And actually there's an echo of that in the curatorial essay between Keiko and I, where we're talking about your piece, and we're talking about whether or not we should offer a transcript of the interviews when it was still part of the conversation at the time. And we were talking about, yeah, like how much access becomes voyeuristic, how much that, like, where's the line between being spoon-fed and bearing witness, and like that's all part of the conversation, even like the curatorial conversation on how to present your work. So I think it's really cool to hear that the considerations were happening on either side. And then the shower speaker, which we'll get to eventually, like just does something to your physical body, like in this space. And I think that's really cool. But what we'll do right now is we'll take a 5-minute break. It's 7:15 right now. So for all our folks on YouTube side, please come back at 7:20 and we'll continue this conversation with our amazing artists. If you have a question, please drop it in the YouTube comments chat section and we'll get to it after the break. See you in 5 minutes. we're just gonna wait for artists to slowly return. Hello, hello. Awesome. Okay. I was like, oh, where should I go after the break? Like there's so many threads, could go in many directions. But I think I'm gonna try to stick to my original agenda first. I'm curious. Okay, so a little bit of context. Like I think Keiko and I, when we were talking about Puncta, we were thinking about access points. Since Punctum is a subjective individual experience, and this exhibition was interested in thinking about narratives that didn't fit, or art that didn't fit or adhere to, or we're dealing with maybe the pressures of like dominant narratives, whether that's like for the sake of visibility or legibility, for the sake of belonging. You know, we sometimes try to adhere, and this exhibition is interested in artists who are actually trying in their work to maybe wiggle room around that and beyond that in some ways. And then as curators, we're also trying to create multiple access points for people coming into the space so that they could experience it in a variety of ways, right? So we're thinking about subjective, deeply personal moments. And the goal is for, you know, some radical potential, whether it's like we've talked about processing or healing or freedom or something like that. I was just wondering if you had a moment like that while you were in the process of making your work, some sort of connection at some point with it that was a deeply personal and like radical moment. Does anyone want to volunteer? It's like it's a weighty question. Nora, do you want to start?
I think I'm collecting my thoughts right now.
Oh yeah, no. If you need the time, we'll practice some silence in the panel as well. But yeah, just like a moment that really stood out for you, like in the making of the work for some reason. It could be any, or like it could be unexpected, it could be expected.
I think for me, like it's I feel like anyone could make the work that I make and tell the story that I told, because so many of our societies actually mirror each other. And you know, that's due to colonialism and the way that cities have been planned in the West by like essentially the same people. um so like the fact that you could hand like a camera and a recorder to someone in like Brixton in the UK, or like in Baltimore, or like certain places, you know, anywhere really in the Rust Belt of America and Canada, like the Rust Belt cities, you can hand them the same tools and they essentially could find the same similarities. And like for me, it's actually like the mundaneness of the colonial project, like it's not creative, it's repetitive. It's like you can like map it, and like, you know, you can like, it's very straightforward, because essentially depending on like geography, things, the same tools were used. Of course, I feel like, you know, you can't really say the same thing about like California. Like in certain places and geographies, it's like more different. But even with like California, I could relate to other places that like look like it. A lot of it was aesthetic, like a lot of the things that take place that are affected by, you know, colonization, capitalism, imperialism are so like are such aesthetic decisions on the behalf of colonizers. And so for me, like as someone looking at geography, recording like geography, making art about geography, I'm like trying to expose that. that it was very like geographical and aesthetic in how things were planned and lazy. So I like think that anyone can do it. I like and like I almost feel like that's like a really good thing. Like I feel like if I don't know you when you live in like Detroit or Baltimore or Toronto, like we essentially can form such deep relationships with each other through just knowing like how to manipulate our own societies, and like share strategies on how we're doing it, and like trying to like live in and like thrive in like the places that we're thriving in. And you know, there's always like stories of like success and failure in different societies, and you never really know until you meet someone. And even in their own city, like I did not know about things happening in Parkdale. There were so many more community initiatives, especially food initiatives in Parkdale that I did not know about until I started going there, which are like still under threat. But you know, that's something that we were lacking in Scarborough until very recently. And so just like even if it's just across the city, like 20 minutes away, like we don't know what's happening. So I guess I don't know if that like, you know, our stories are definitely like, you know, our stories are told for us. But I also feel like because we're the masses, there's so many, like the quantity, like there's so many of ours. So like in a way they're like, it's just like almost like it's like amazing. It's amazing to see how much, but also how similar they can be. Again, like with like, you know, anyone like saying that anyone could make the work that I made, like I think that they could be really similar. And then there's beauty in that as well, because we can really connect. So I don't really like in my work, I don't like speak directly to the policymakers or the colonizers. You know, I kind of just want to reach out to like people that like that understand me. Because I feel like that's where for me like lateral support is like what I need. Um because people that have like stepped in the same things that I've stepped in have the solutions that I need. And so for me that's like I don't like the things that are being the stories that are being told about me don't even concern me. Like they don't even like like they don't concern me because they really have nothing to do with me. Like they're not saying anything that I connect to, or they're not even me like at all. So I'm not concerned with them. It's like, yeah, that's like basically what it is. Like it is it gets difficult. Like, you know, there's so many aspects of our identity that we can go into and we're talking about. Like I'm Pashtun, like I'm Pathan from South Asia. And so there's so many stories about like people from my tribal region that are told. Um and like so much like things that have been stolen from us during like a war. Especially like the war in Afghanistan, you know, like there's just so much like theft of storytelling, and like putting an Afghan woman, a Pashtun woman on National Geographic and selling millions. And so there's like specific, like each of us can, I'm sure, go into stories where we've been profited off of in the media, in like in art. But like then it comes down to like, how are you connecting? So sorry. How are you connecting? Again, laterally. And so that's like for me, like, I guess like, yeah, that's it. That's it.
I'm a little struck by what you just said. I'm not gonna lie to you. I have two thoughts, Noor, and then an actual answer to the question. First of all, my grandmother used to always say, she's like, whatever people say about me is none of my damn business. And she said that in very Egyptian Arabic. And I feel like you just said that, but in a much more eloquent way, which I really appreciated. And I'm thinking about that sentence of like, I don't know if artists have the guts to admit that anyone can make the work they're making. And for you to just like sit here and so nonchalantly say that like it's nothing, and I'm like, you're breaking my world right now. Because it's very generous, and you're right. Like there's so much generosity in that moment where it's like to acknowledge that you're not special at all. It's so good. It's like, well, yeah, anyone can do this. Really, anyone can do the work that we're doing. The only difference is like we're making that active choice to actually do it. But like in terms of like skill level, like all the above, and like YouTube is free for now, so like people can look up how to do things. Sorry, I was just really excited by those things, and like it's always nice to hear things that make you like, oh, pause. I think the Puncta moment for me was like trust from Brennevi. I think like there's so many moments in making work that are like, oh, this is like so, like this is so precious in like in a way that you feel you really can reflect on it later. But it takes a certain kind of person to make something as beautiful and wonderful and like full of care the way Brennevi did, and then to send an email being like, hey, do you want to like take it and make something completely different? And like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, I imagine that when collaborations like this exist, like I don't think I would have had a problem if Brennevi was like 100% a micromanager, you know, and was just like, I want it this way and I want it that way and change this and change that. But and you know, that would have been something completely different, I imagine. But this, like, it takes like such a certain type of like trust to be okay with not being the one who does the thing. Because like to Noor's point, we all can do the thing. Like we can all do the thing. And if Brennevi really wanted, I'm sure Brennevi could have done the thing. And it's like, but it's like, oh, actually, I have put my heart into this. Can I also ask you to do the same? And the asking is so hard that like to have that moment, to share that moment, and to just like give it away like that, like is so, there's something so like there's tension there that's wonderful and also painful, and also to give away control in a world that makes it really, really, really hard to give up control. I think there, like, I have a lot of respect for that sort of like thing. And I think like so much of why like this work is so loaded is because of how both different and similar we are as people. Because like I find that Brennevi is a much, much gentler soul than I am. I tend to be able to like very like cutthroat sometimes. Brennevi's like a breeze. And it's just like, it's so true. But it's when you can see it, like the facilitation of the work is like so like God, I'm stuck with tender, but what a word to be stuck with. Like it's tender, and it's like really considerate of the placement of our bodies and who we are as people and the context of us in the grand scheme of things. While as like the editing, you can tell is a little bit blunt, I find, because it is carrying so much of Brennevi's like, you know, melancholy and facilitation, but it's taking that language and very much like cutting it apart and like really adding that diaspora, which I find like appears in my work even when I don't want it to. And it's like, what does it mean? You know what I mean? What does it mean to like take this, like take like so much of Brennevi's heart and then like add so much of like my influence that is so like angry and tends to be like very like like I'm a hoarder of people. Sometimes I find that I'm like, I just want to hide the people I love forever so that they would never be hurt. And sometimes the work will show that I'm like, oh, you know what? The audience doesn't deserve the whole audio. I'm just going to give them some of it. It's like, this is so silly, but also true. Because it's like, there is some, like, when we think about access, when we think about this idea of just like choosing what we allow, quote unquote, people outside of our communities to get access to is our right, because we've never been allowed to choose anything. So we might as well choose this. And I think that's, you know, it's those moments of like articulating choice, but also articulating letting go of control. Like that for me, that's radicalness, right? Like the most like non-capitalist, non-colonial thing in the world is to ask for help and then take it. And I think there's like that moment, right? Like, Barnaby, I don't know, I have a crush on you, I guess, but it's true.
It's very mutual. This talk has been so affirming for me and my love for Jasmine. Yeah, so much of what Noor said and Jasmine said feels like very resonant. I think there is something like, I mean, any art-based work is like, it deals with your ego and feeling like you can acknowledge your work as replicable and offering like the skills or even just like the freedom for someone to carry your work and do something with it is really, it's really fun. And I really do appreciate the Tamil Archive Project for bringing us together in that way. I guess, so the original question was like moments of punctum through the piece. And I think there's like various moments that I was reflecting on because I had the luxury of being able to think while Noor and Jasmine were speaking. I think one moment of punctum for sure was when we were like gearing up to do the workshop during the first week of April, and we were in correspondence with the Tamil Housing Co-op, and they were like, yeah, like everything's golden. And I was so excited to be able to do something in that space because it's a historic space for like especially Tamil migration in Toronto. And then suddenly they had said, hey, like the entire facility is closed. We need to like protect the senior community that lives here. And I was like, very interesting. Maybe this will reopen in 2 weeks. And that was when we had learned like about COVID, and it was very mysterious. There's a lot of panic. It was like this almost like looming sense of catastrophe, but it also really didn't feel like it was something that would restrict our lives. So understanding that, and then confronting the reality that this wouldn't be a physical workshop, is definitely punctum. But then also like having reimagined it for a Zoom setting, and then having these very silent, potentially even awkward moments of people producing or reenacting these gestures of care, of joy, of laughter, of tenderness, together in this like synchronous manner as all of this was like colliding behind us, felt like a series of punctum too. And then there's one specific screen grab from the video that Jasmine had shared with me where it asks like, where in your body do you locate love? And there's one grid of my friend Gao kind of like holding his beard. And then another one of a participant, Nida, turned around holding her back. And for some reason, like the juxtaposition of those two images felt like a moment of punctum for me as well. It caused like me to just stop and think through that. And I guess I wanted to share that the intention behind the work was this like growing interest that I felt around understanding our bodies as archives, mostly because our like the kind of motivation behind the Tamil Archive Project, but also a lot of my work is trying to develop like a sense of cultural memory as it relates to my identity. And what Noor shared was so resonant because I also belong to a community where we don't have a lot of historical documentation as it relates to our heritage due to persecution, violence, and genocide. So being in a space in an era where things were very much collapsing, but also reenacting these gestures collectively felt very Puncta to me.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to process everybody's answers cumulatively. There's so much there. Thank you for sharing. I feel that all the stuff that has been said is present in the room actually when you enter the exhibition, and it's really interesting because I've been in that space almost every single day since we started installing. So I feel like I have this bodied relationship. Like when I come home, Baltimore's like playing, like I'll hear strains of it, right? Because even in the room, you walk through it and then there'll be just like one or two like very light refrains that like play, or I'll hear the audio from Touch and Flesh, and I hear it at home. And it's so interesting to like think about how that like reverbs in your body, and like my body is an archive of RAX Puncta right now, like that cumulative relationship with that space that I've had over the last week and a half. So everything you're saying is really impacting my physical body actually, like a memory. I have like other questions, but I actually want to make space for some audience questions that came in. I think this is very related to what we've already been talking about, but I'm curious if the question itself will maybe change how the answers are formed. The question is, can you share what it means to revisit tenderness, or in a sense, revisit the bruises in a public format? I think there's this, we have having this conversation about access and control and generosity. And I feel all of those things are sort of like maelstroming in this question about why revisit these bruises in a public format. Does anyone want to maybe speak to that?
I mean, I can speak to it. In a public format, honestly, because like a lot of the times, like we're going through it ourselves anyways, like, you know, individually we're seeing, like for me, I was seeing what I was seeing on like the streets alone anyways, and I wanted to share that collectively because I knew that it wasn't only me seeing these things, but we don't really talk about it because like when I'm on the streets, I'm going somewhere, you know, like I'm passing by, I'm trying to get to the grocery store, I'm trying to get to the hospital, I'm trying to get places. So I'm not stopping and really having these conversations. So to, again, like a recording is so beautiful because you're allowed to meditate and share it, and recreate it if it's, you know, part of artwork. And so I think that like, yeah, I did that to be able to connect with others. Yeah, that's it.
I do feel like it's like, why do you make art? Kind of question, which is like, I think that's why it's really it's a good question to have. Yeah, it's like when people always ask me like, oh, where do you make art? I'm like, because I think I'm like super lonely, and it's like, and that's it. You know, I'm a deeply lonely person, and I know that some of y'all are lonely, and I'm just gonna keep work until we start admitting it. You know what I mean? It's like such a silly, like it's like an honest but silly truth. It's like, oh, it's like, yes, artists are narcissists, and that's why we like to put all of our emotions on a wall, like a little bit of that. But more importantly, I think we're so like deeply devastated by the world, and it's like, and it feels so isolating and gaslighting to be devastated on your own, that it's like, you know what, I am going to make work about this in this like random hopeless hope moment of attempting to validate that I am not as alone as I am thinking I am, or I'm believing I am. And it's like, you know, like the pressing of the bruise, I always think about that. I see bruises and I press on them, which is like weirdly sadistic, and like there's something like bizarre there, but it's like, you know, this idea of just like something about seeing something that will give you like hurt is gives it the appeal, because then it's a substantial amount of emotion and it's evidence that there is pain. And it like very often I am grateful for scars, I am grateful for bruises, because they're the only proof that pain has occurred and harm occurred. Like, how do we, when we are unable to like fully articulate our pain, because pain is very often like not something we know how to talk about because of how horrifying and traumatic an experience it is, like physical harm becomes this like this evidence, this like moment of like, see, it did hurt. And maybe work is very much that, this like, oh, this evidence, or like, well, the bruise is right there, the work is right there, the bruise exists, of course, you know, of course it hurts because you can see it. And if I can make it into the, if it can appear into the world as like this like physical visual bruise, then it is evidence that I am also hurting, and therefore maybe you can acknowledge too that you are hurting, so we're not so bloody lonely all the time about it.
That that resonates so much, Yasmin, because a lot of the intention or frustration I feel, like when I was far more active within Tamil community organizing and advocacy, was like insisting that something terrible had happened, or having to like painfully legibly make like translate violence for the public to understand that you know, that we had been like persecuted in certain ways. And metaphor that I would think of in my head is like pointing to a site of a wound or a bruise and being like, this happened, and like in a way, like it's something that caused me a lot of like personal, like it was just emotionally very challenging for me, and something I think I've had to step away from in some ways, because there's this humiliation attached to like consistently having to defend your existence in some ways. So the reason that I like the motivation behind this project was to like to embrace our physicality and our wounds and the bends of our fingers in certain ways that are unique to our histories, but also prove that like we also hold libraries of memory within us. So now I'm like remembering what the audience question was. To be in a public format was for me like I don't like want to appear ultra modest or anything, but I truthfully have not exhibited a lot of artwork publicly. So this experience was very affirming. It was just so warm to share space with Noor and our other artists, Mo, Jess, and Vince, in this beautifully curated room where there's like very clearly an intentionality around how like fabric and like three-dimensional objects and even our video occupy space and encourage people to interact with it. It's a very like touch-based exhibit, I find. So for me, it was very gratifying. It was beautiful. I will say that I am like pleasantly surprised by, so the video work kind of invites people to share their own reflections, and I didn't I guess I underestimated how people would respond. But Jasmine just mentioned that she had to create another page in the notebook, or third or fourth page, because there were so many responses. So I'm very excited to read them following the end of the exhibit.
Yeah, I was doing a podcast like as part of the festival and talking about this exhibition, and I think I had been explaining that in a way, RX Puncta feels like a very selfish exhibition. It's selfish in the sense that like so many times we are self-effacing in the ways in which we try to become legible. Like we give up a lot of who we are in order to achieve other things. And I think that really speaks to maybe some of the labor, Pranavi, that you're like that tension you feel where you may point to a bruise and your goal is to ask for an acknowledgement of your person. And what happens is the bruise becomes your person. And you're not allowed to expand beyond that. And I think Puncta is really, really invested in trying to imagine what a practice of like selfishness in that sense would do for people, whether it be for folks making the art or folks receiving it. So I feel, yeah, I really like, I'm still emotional right now. I was like, I'm not going to cry on this panel, so I'm determined not to cry, but I cried in the last panel. So I was trying really hard. Okay, I do want to like try to get through audience questions. So it's like a tone breaking a little bit, but I do really want to give some space to that. I think towards Noor's piece, I had a question about why you chose to project on paper. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then an audience actually asked about the shower speaker. So maybe you want to talk about like the specific way you chose to install this piece in the room. Talk a little bit about that thought process.
So for me to bring the work on paper, it was installed on two large rolling papers, like rolls of papers that were each 4 feet in width. And the works were basically like every geography was screened next to each other. And it was falling down on the scrolls onto the floor. And so I did that to kind of emulate anything like written, a prescription, like anything that is written without context and without like real relationship building, without real like genuine investigation and like research and meditation, and to kind of put like these geographies on there as if, you know, like the way that city planners are planning these places are like the way that doctors just hand you prescriptions. And I literally have like 4 prescriptions right now from my dermatologist who I went to 2 days ago, and I knew she's gonna do this. She like every single thing I said, dry skin, would just like hand me like a prescription like without asking any questions. I have like 5. I'm not getting any of them because I have a traditional Chinese medical doctor now who like really investigates things and like really like gets to the root of like these are the lifestyle changes that need to take place. Like this is what you should be eating, this is what you should be doing, this is like how you're gonna heal. And like I really just went to my dermatologist as an experiment to see like to be like, okay, this is, you know, is this gonna happen again? And that's what happened. And so, you know, I feel like putting anything on paper and handing it to someone, it's just so easy. And so I put the footage on paper, you know, like as it was just like something being handed to someone without much like research and intention. And then the sound shower is basically this speaker that like shoots directional sound onto the people under directly under the speaker. And so the reason I chose that is because I wanted the audio to be more personal to people that come close to it, rather than it like potentially echo or hit people in angles that like they're not capturing everything in its like fullest form. So they're not capturing like the voice of the singer or like parts of the interview in like its fullest form. I want them to like feel like they have headphones on. And it also has this effect that like it literally feels like it's like the person's in your head. Um, and I like wanted that to be the case because I just feel like again like Yasmin said, like oftentimes people aren't listening. So what happens when you use a tool that like messes with your brain? It literally gets into your brain. I love technology. I actually like do identify myself as a researcher, as an artist researcher, and like not in the sense that I'm like reading books, but in the sense that I'm researching technology to use, researching like mediums and methods to use, to enhance the meaning and message and how to interact with people, enhance that experience. Um, physically. So like the sound shower that I like came across in grad school while doing my MFA, I was like, this needs to be used in one of my pieces, at the right time, like, and this is the right time. It also has added benefit of not like disrupting other people's work in the gallery setting. And group of exhibitions, you have to be respectful and mindful of the people that you're exhibiting alongside. And it like it did it all. And so yeah, those are my why I chose what I chose.
That's awesome. It definitely was the time to use it. I've seen so many people like do this as they walk underneath it and like get hit with the sound. It's so visceral, that sudden catch of attention. Yeah, it's amazing. And it actually almost does it's like a very different type of audio from the audio that's coming out of Touch and Flesh, in that like it's wrapping that whole space and being like, hey, join us. It's they have like very different functions, and it's amazing that they're both in the same space. Okay, I have one last question for Pranvi and Yasmin. It's related to my question that was about some of the conversations that you might have had in putting this thing together. The audience question was about whether or not you could share about that collaborative process. And you've already talked about it a little, but when it comes to something as personal as artistic expression, is it a challenge to involve other people in that process? So maybe like some anecdotes.
It was honestly so easy and so like lovely to work with Yasmin. I I completely fell in love with the way the film or the video was edited. Maybe there were some changes around like, oh, I really want this sequence or this audio segment to appear here. Actually, so interesting. There's one part of the video where Yasmin herself speaks about locating, I'm not remembering what exact emotion it was, but locating a specific emotion in her eyebrows because it's really sweet, like her family like adjusts each other's eyebrows. And interestingly, Yasmin had not included that in the first cut of the video. And I was like, no, I love that. I would love for you to include it. So we did some messing around with that. And I do remember it was like we were editing it under tight timelines. We were both working at nonprofits, just like floating between so many different like jobs and contracts and things like that. So even just finding the time and dedicating the time to do so amidst everything Yasmin was working on felt really moving for me. So yeah, it was a really sweet, probably like one of my favorite collaborations.
I feel like you're all very bored of us just gushing about each other, which I acknowledge is cheesy but necessary. Yeah, it was really funny actually, because so I took it out because I cringe at the sound of my own voice. And I was like, this is terrible, take it out. And Brenda was like, put that back in. And I was like, okay. So that was like a lovely moment. And it is a sweet story looking back. And I think it's nice that it's there. But you know, when you're like, oh no, picture myself, delete, delete, delete. And I think that's what happened with that. Funnily enough, I think we had the most conversation about attributions, if you remember, Rennerby. And I'm only bringing this up because I think it was a lovely back and forth. So I would dare say this was a fight, but it was such a cute fight. So there was a discussion of like Rennerby being like, okay, great, you know, we're entering this work, and we were very much putting it into a call for submissions, and Rennerby was like, great, Jasmine, just put your name on the work as like the artist. And I was like, are you joking? No. Right. And then I am not joking, because I also went through our email thread. I think there is like around 5 emails of like, no, you put your name on it. No, you put your name on it. And then Rennerby's like, I don't feel good about just putting my name on. And then we had to call each other, and we didn't have to do that when we were making the actual work. But that like back and forth of like, you know, I remember our talk about it, and this idea of like, you know, Rennerby being both a writer and a facilitator, and like me having like put the video together in that way. Like for me, it was like, well, yes, but it's in the same way that this is yours. Does that make sense? Like, of course, like it is like, I don't see this work as like my work as much as I was trusted enough to see someone's vision through it. And yes, you can tell that like it's when you see my other video works, it's hard not to be like, I know who kind of made this, just because they carry a certain tone to them. But like there is something to be said about putting someone's name on something and whose name goes on it. And it was really important. And I know it was important for me that, yes, this is a collaboration in the fact that we work well together, but so much of this is Rennerby's heart in it. And it's so important to acknowledge when someone's heart is the whole work. And being an editor and taking on that role instead of being like an artistic collaborator is so, like, to me, so essential, because it's like, how do you carve out the space for someone to take ownership over the thing that they've brought into the world? And it was like, and I think that's where we butted heads the most. And it's like, it's such a sweet, cheesy ass thing now looking back, because it's like, well, of course we fought on whose name was going to be on it, but like in the weirdest way possible. Because like, again, like colonially, you want to be known as the person who made the thing. So, but like, not in this. This wasn't made in that tone. This wasn't made in that gesture. So it was so natural that the problem that occurred, that we felt that we owed each other, you know, the rights to the work when the work was all of ours rather than just one person's. And I think this was like a product of that like beautiful gesture of trust from Rennerby, and me like wanting to hold that trust with the utmost care possible. And yeah, like, what a fight to have. I wish all of my weird collaborative things are this bizarre and adorable and just genuinely gentle. But yeah.
Yeah, that's so, I think that anecdote just really speaks to the tenderness, again, going back to that word of like, that's like permeating, honestly, this exhibition. Like, I think every piece is bringing something so vulnerable, but so self-aware and so connected at the same time. And because those things are realized in their own ways, when they come together, I think there's this cumulative, feels like a hug. I feel a cumulative welcome. And yeah, it's been such a privilege to curate the show with Keiko and just be in conversation with everyone. I'm really glad we were able to invite you, Jasmine, for this conversation in particular. But I have no way to properly end this conversation, so I'm just going to abruptly say, unfortunately, we have run out of time. But if you're watching from YouTube, the show is open till November 20th, 6 p.m. I really encourage you to check it out. If you haven't seen Tuesday's Artist Talk, it is as tender and as like warm as today's conversation. I really encourage, and that's already up on YouTube. This conversation will also be up on YouTube. So I welcome you to revisit it, share it with other folks who you think might need this conversation. And again, thank you so much to everybody for being here. Thank you for your generosity in sharing your processes, your thoughts, and all the labor and love that you put into these pieces. What a beautiful conversation. Thank you all. So everyone have a good night. And we'll hope to see you at some other event at the festival upcoming soon. Collectively.